First tonight, is enough being done to protect us from criminals who've been released from jail or handed community sentences? Today, an official inspection has branded the East Midlands Probation Services as inadequate. It says that's partly down to staff shortages and early prison releases. The inspectors also criticised offenders' risk assessments and rehabilitation. But they praised the way the Probation Service supports victims of crime. Here's our social affairs correspondent, Jeremy Ball.
Probation's the hidden part of a justice system that protects our towns and cities, supervising thousands of convicted criminals who live in our communities and trying to stop them reoffending too. It's about steering offenders into productive lives without putting the rest of us at risk. But now an official inspection's called for a raft of improvements.
The quality of work to protect the public from harm just wasn't good enough. So we were particularly concerned about the safeguarding of children and in terms of domestic abuse, so the risk that men on probation pose to women.
The inspectors say that risk often wasn't clear enough because of poor information sharing with the police and other agencies. They're worried about understaffing too, compounded by a surge in demand after the prisoner early release scheme. And the inspectors say too many inmates then leave East Midlands jails with nowhere to live. They're often found by rough sleeping teams like this one.
Probation practitioners almost exclusively wanted to do a good job, and in many cases were performing heroics. But the probation practitioners simply had too much to do, and that was affecting their ability to deliver high quality work.
The inspectors say they did find green shoots of improvements in Derby, where more offenders are now receiving better support. But they say much more action's needed across the East Midlands. Action to keep us all safe.
Here in the studio, and Jeremy, this is all about safety, isn't it? How many people are actually on probation?
Well, over 10,000 in total across the East Midlands probation region. Now that covers the Derbyshire, Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire police force areas. It covers 13 different prisons, and it includes well over 3,500 prisoners who are out on licence. The others are people serving community sentences. They're often doing that unpaid work. And today's report says the average probation officer in this region is now responsible for 34 offenders. Now that is a lot of people to supervise when you consider that some of them will have committed very serious crimes.
Yeah, and there are some really serious concerns in this report.
Yeah, and I think it's worth looking in a little more detail, Sarah, at what they found. Well over 300 cases reviewed. Here's the overall rating: inadequate. Inadequate for several reasons: the way they protect the public, the way they steer offenders away from crime, inadequate advice to the courts, inadequate risk assessments for offenders doing that unpaid work, and inadequate resettlement plans. That's when prisoners are released from jail. There were three other findings. Leadership and staffing in the East Midlands requires improvement, but work with victims was ranked as good. And this report says victims of violent and sexual crimes were well supported by the East Midlands Probation Service. In fact, they were actually often asked to contribute to decisions about an inmate's release.
So is anything actually going to happen as a result of this?
Well, they've made 11 different recommendations, which include better risk assessments, especially for serious offenders and when children are at risk. They want to see better court reports with information about things like domestic abuse, and that is to make sure it's properly considered when those offenders get sentenced. You won't be surprised to hear there is also a plea for extra resources. Without that, they say, the probation service simply can't do its job effectively.
So has there been any response to that?
Yeah, we have had a statement from the Ministry of Justice that talks about tackling what it calls significant strain. Nationally, it says the service is getting hundreds of millions in extra funding and recruiting an extra 1,300 probation officers by March next year. And this inspection has also prompted extra safeguarding checks here in the East Midlands. They are looking particularly at how they deal with domestic violence in this region. And that is so important because, as we know, it's such a hidden crime and one which has such a huge impact.
It does. OK, Jeremy, thank you very much for that.